Welcome back. That was a great interview and conversation with David Turtzi. And now I am here to talk to you about basically the title of this one here is the next generation of board games. In general, we're going to look at both the current state of some of the practical things on the publishing end. We're also going to look at the state of things on innovation, materials, those kinds of things. And we're going to look at some of the social aspects of the hobby as well. So for sure, this is meant to be a bit of an interactive discussion. Certainly, I want to share with you a bit of information, especially on some of the topics that I know that people are asking a lot of questions about right now. But also, if you have things that you want to contribute and add to this discussion, just post it in the chat and we will definitely talk about it. So it's meant to be an interactive, a bit of a Q&A if you want as well. So if there are any questions that you have on the topics that we're talking about, feel free to post them there. All right, let me just go in here. I just need to make a small prep for what's coming. All right, so the first thing that I want to talk about is related to this, and this is just a practical thing for two reasons. Right now we're in the middle of convention season. Normally the convention season would look very different any other year. Obviously Gen Con would be late July, beginning of August. We would be looking at right now a massively packed spiel with lots of announcements about games coming out and so forth. And this year, for understandable reasons, looks very different, right? And we've already seen some of the effects of that since earlier this year. In fact, we've seen things since late last year. Normally, there are not things that release over the holidays or early in the year, but definitely once we started getting into the later Q1 and Q2 releases, we saw how delivery dates started slipping. There have been lots of Kickstarter games that have not delivered from many publishers, and everyone is talking about the issue with logistics and so forth. And there are two things that we're going to talk about just to make sure that everyone is clear on exactly what is going on, how that affects the things that are already getting published, and how it also affects the future of the games. So the first thing that I want to talk about, actually before we get into it, first thing that I want to mention is that this is not an issue that is limited to board games. This is a global logistical issue right now, and all of the things that we're talking about, you can feel the effects of it in all aspects of things. Prices are going up on a lot of products. Toy manufacturers are talking about shortages leading up to the holidays and so forth. So this is not limited to the board games. So basically, everything that we're talking about here will be reflected in other industries as well, but I will share things from a board game perspective because that's the area where we have insight as a publisher. So the first thing that I want to do is I'm going to share here on BGG. We have a blog on there called Gaming for a Living, and Andrei Novak, who is basically the executive manager, the CEO of our company, he's been sharing a few things on there recently about so this particular one was titled Shipping Madness and Future Cost of Board Games, and this one was really in response to the fact that there have been so many discussions going on about, okay, what's happening with shipping and what about release dates and delays and whatever, in ways that seem both unnatural and that raise very, very fair questions. And I just want to make sure that we iron this out and we talk about it because this will be related to just what will happen not only with the releases that are coming out right now, but also what we can expect for the foreseeable future. So first of all, we had and continue to have a shortage of shipping containers. And the shortage of shipping containers is simply for the fact that there are more items that are, well, basically going back a bit, when COVID started and there were lockdowns in China, the rest of the world went into lockdown when the factories in China started opening up. So basically, when everything else was locking down and production was stopping elsewhere, that's when we also imported a lot of things from China. China exported a lot of their goods. So what ended up happening is that we had a more unidirectional funnel of products coming out of China. And then at the ports, there were shortages of, first there were shortages of people being able to unload the ships that were coming. Then there were shortages of people being able to transport the goods. And all this led to a chain reaction of the fact that once you get a container off a ship, because most products are shipped via ocean freight on containers, that container might be taken off the ship, taken to whatever the destination is, and there is zero incentive in most cases to bring back an empty container and to ship an empty container back to China. So that's one of the reasons for the shipping shortage, is that with the shortage of drivers and people at the port and everything, and just the cost of things in general, those containers, they ended up somewhere, are sitting there, and they are not going back to China, which is where the shipping shortages also came from. Not to mention the fact that there was an increase, because people are staying home and so forth, there was an increase in online shopping, was an increase in gaming, so more products were being purchased, but they all came out of China. So the number of goods that came out of China increased, but the number of containers going back, even just to the ports, but also back on ships to China, was decreased, partially because there were a lot of factories and other industries that were in lockdown and didn't produce or ship any goods back to Asia. So that's one of the reasons. Now, what happened as a result of this? Well, shipping prices started going up. And this is something that is talked about here in this blog article. So Andre is talking about and giving some examples, and of course these examples, they apply to us. They may differ slightly from one publisher to another. It depends on which port you're shipping out of, which port you're shipping into, and so forth. But they're general, and if nothing else, they're representative of what things look like right now when it comes to logistics. So Andre is mentioning here that in 2019, so late 2019, just before the pandemic started, the cost of shipping by sea for a 40-foot container, which is the standard length containers, from Shanghai to Oakland, California, was $2,900. So about $3,000 to ship a 40-foot container from China to a port in the United States. Okay. Of course, there are other costs that you have to take into account. There are the port charges, there are import costs, there are agencies that you're paying to deal with paperwork and whatever. You have all the costs of loading, unloading, transport via road, for example, to final destination. But we're talking here just about the cost of the ocean freight, the container from China to the United States, so about $3,000. So today, when this is written, which was on August 15th, so about a month ago, this was written, that same 40-foot container, the cheapest price for that same 40-foot container is $18,000. And the prices are still going up, so it's a six-fold increase. When you have containers that increase in price 6 times, now you can say that it's understandable that some of these prices have gone up, again because of the supply and demand. You can say that because of the situation and what things look like, that this is understandable. But still, we're talking here about prices not just doubling or tripling, which they had done earlier in basically late 2020 and early 2021. Prices started going up, but now we're talking about prices that are 6, 7, 8, 10 times what they used to be a year and a half ago. Obviously, this is completely unsustainable for the majority of the companies who are now deciding, well, what do we do? So let's look at an example of a Kickstarter game, for example. This might have been a game that was crowdfunded in 2019. The prices that they got quoted were $3,000. Maybe they baked in a healthy buffer of doubling the price. Maybe they say, what if something unexpected happens? We're going to double, maybe even triple the quotes that we have received. Well, that means that even if they considered that worst case scenario, the shipping prices would triple, which normally that's not the type of increase that you would see, it is still double or triple that amount. So even any company that would have done an estimate, no matter the buffer that you would reasonably have taken into account, that buffer does not exist. It was depleted a long time ago, because shipping prices have just gone up exponentially. So of course that means that now the companies that are, a lot of them have, we heard early 2020 when prices did start to go up, that this will be temporary, this is not going to be an issue. Late 2020, well, this is probably because of holiday shipping. Maybe by the spring this will work itself out. Spring came, summer came, prices are continuing to go up, and more importantly, there isn't currently any sign that, prices aside, that the overall shipping issue is about to be fixed anytime soon. There is still a shortage of shipping containers. There's still a problem in unloading the ships in a timely manner. There's still an issue with shortage of drivers and so forth. This is an ongoing problem. There is currently no reasonable date by which we can say this is when this will probably be basically starting to go away. What we can say, and again, this is a global issue, this is not just board game related, what we can say is that these logistics issues will be with us at least through 2022. So at least a year and 3 months. There's no reason to believe that these issues will be addressed by then. And I know that these are negative news and so forth, but that's the reality. For the next year and some months, there's no reason to believe that logistics will significantly change. We don't think that the prices are going to continue to skyrocket, because that's also not sustainable. There's only so much that companies are willing to and able to pay in order to get the products. Now, let's go back to the Kickstarter example again. If there was a company that had produced their games and they're now ready, they're sitting at a port ready to be shipped, they're now facing the reality of either paying an additional $15,000 to $25,000 per container to ship the same goods that they had planned on shipping, right? If they feel like, well, that's too expensive, we can't do that, well, then the alternative is to keep it in a warehouse or at the port and continue to pay storage fees. Either way, this is like you say, it's being stuck between a rock and a hard place. Having to choose between shipping the goods at prices that you cannot justify versus keeping them in storage at prices that you cannot justify. Basically just saying, well, how long do we keep it in storage? knowing full well that there's no end in sight. There might be a year and the prices are still where they are today. Well, now you've paid storage fees for a year and you still haven't shipped the goods. So that's the reality, right? That's one of the things that is happening. Andre goes into a couple other things. He gives examples of shipping from China to Germany. 2019, the cost was $1,600. Right now, that's $16,000 again, 10 times more than it was. And then the important thing here is that, so he's saying, well, why should we care that this surge? And obviously you might say, well, this is the problem of the manufacturers who chose to produce in China, and I'll get back to that in a second. But the short-term answer to this is that the shipping cost, the ocean freight cost, that's part of the price that is paid when retail prices are calculated, right? Retail prices are based on, and again, this is often in board game at least, it's partially a cost-based model where you're looking at how much does it cost aside from office costs, which is basically the office that you have for your company, the time and salaries and so forth of the employees. Then you have commissioned artwork, you have designer royalties, you have production costs, you have freight costs, and so forth. All of that gets baked into the cost of a game, ranging depending on the game from anywhere from $4 or $5 to $10 for a game. And then a formula gets added to that saying, well, how much do we need to make based on the costs along the way? And that sets the MSRP, right? So here's an example. Andre gives an example of, and it's easiest to look at what we fondly refer to as Ticket to Ride size games. Basically, games that are the standard box size Ticket to Ride square, 3.5 inches or 3 inches deep. Here's the example of Teotihuacan, MSRP of $50. Can I put a link to this in the chat? Yes, absolutely. That's a great idea. Thank you. So that's the link to this Thank you. I don't know why I wasn't thinking about that. So here's the example of Teotihuacan, for example. A 40-foot container can fit roughly 6,000 copies. That means that the increase now, and it goes into, okay, what's the breakdown? How much does the distributor pay, or the partners that are picking up the games? How much do they pay for the games and so forth? But if you're looking at the shipping cost per copy of the game, so if you're looking at the old shipping cost, $2,900 split across 6,000 copies, because that's roughly how many fit in a 40-foot container. That means that 48 cents per copy, so let's round it up to 50 cents per copy. That was the shipping cost in 2019. In 2021, that same shipping cost is at least $2.50 per copy of the game. That's an additional $2 per copy of the game. So if you're looking then at, first of all, so Andre says, well, that now we're all faced with the decision of, do we accept this, or do we fail to deliver the products that have been purchased, or do we say, sorry, we can't deliver this, we therefore don't get that distribution deal, whatever the case may be. Do we just accept this and pay the cost? And if so, how does that then trickle down the line? So now he's talking here about the cost for publishing a game. Manufacturing is a big portion of that. Basically, producing a game like Teotihuacan costs $9. And that's taking into account just the production costs and so forth, the printing and the laminating, In Teotihuacan you have the wooden pieces, but this will of course vary depending on the game and the components that are in it. But for Teotihuacan, about $9 per copy of the game. Marketing makes up about $1 per copy. Royalties, let's say $1.50, and then you have other costs, salaries, office, development costs, and so forth, about $2. If you look at a game like Teotihuacan, we get paid by the distributor $17.50, so $17.50 per copy of the game. Subtract for that the normal cost, that leaves $4.10, which is basically then the profit from that, which goes towards other games and so forth. And this is assuming a healthy size print run. Obviously, the MSRP does not fluctuate depending if whether we print 10,000 copies or 1,000 copies. So let's say that there's need for a small reprint, particularly for localization partners that maybe are not, obviously the English language market is bigger because people internationally can also play using English copies. But let's say that you have a desire to print a smaller run of something, unless the companies can get together and print at the same time, because then you can reduce the overall cost. The cost of printing is still going to fluctuate. So $9 was the average, but that means that for some printings, depending on the number of copies that are printed, that might be $10, might be $10.50. For other printings, that if we get a really big print run where a lot of partners are printing the same game at the same time, that might go down to $8.50 or maybe even $8. On average, across the life of the product, $9 to print it, plus then the other costs that are static for marketing, designer royalties, operational costs, and so forth. So $17.50 minus the costs of printing and marketing the game leaves $4.10. Now that extra $2 or $2.50, depending on how much you're getting, again, the 18,000 is the minimum price that we are seeing. We're seeing prices have gone up even in the month since this article. They have gone up towards 20,000 and above that. That has to get covered out of the $4, which means that now the profitability suddenly really decreased. There's another look here at, oh, hello, by the way, Deadpan. Welcome. Good to see you. Then there's a comparison with another game. Now, there are a few assumptions that are being made about Seven Wonders Duel, because we don't publish it. We don't know their exact cost, but we're making general numbers here that are reasonably close, because we know how much it costs to produce a game of a certain size, components, marketing, and so forth. So Seven Wonders Duel, that means that you can, because that's smaller, you can fit more copies into a container, so 3 times as many. 18,000, that means that the cost per copy was 16 cents in 2019. And then it's now $1 instead in 2021. An increase of 84 cents. However, now you have a much lower MSRP. So you're looking at, again, that 84 cents is suddenly a big chunk of the cost of that game. So again, the lower the cost is of something while taking up a lot of space, the more detrimental this is. So games that have, even though they cost more, but again, and this is typical for a Kickstarter game, for example, they might cost more overall, but they also, you typically sell it at a lower cost. There is a smaller profit margin because you're not selling to distributors. So you're selling it for less to the backers because you get to keep a bigger portion anyway. However, often with Kickstarter games, particularly games that are deluxified in some way. Now you have inserts that are designed to hold the components, but that also means that there's some air in the boxes. That means that the boxes take up more space without necessarily having a price that justifies the space. Just because a game takes up twice the size of a Teotihuacan Ticket to Ride size box. Like again, the MSRP for Teotihuacan is $50, of which no matter what the price is on the retail end, whether you're buying from a local game store or online or whatever, the amount that we get from the distributor, that amount is the same. But then you're looking at a larger game, even our own deluxe master sets, which are typically twice the size of a normal Ticket to Ride size box. But they don't sell for twice the price. They sell in the neighborhood of $88, which then includes some of the other costs as well. Of course, there are profits that get taken out from Kickstarter or other crowdfunding and so forth. So in the end, the short of it is that in some cases, the extra cost of freight can be justified and can be taken out of the profit. It's not sustainable, because that reduces the ability for a company to grow. It also does not in any way take into account investing in future projects, because we, like we've talked about many times, often you work on a game for a year or two, and then you get the return once the game is being sold. That money goes towards making new games for the future. Any planning and forecasting has gotten thrown off because there were expectations of how much the games would sell for based on quantities, and the forecasting on the amount of pre-orders and whatever. All of that math that went into saying, well, how many copies are being sold? Okay, we're selling this much on the US market through GTS, that is our distributor. There's so much in Australia, there's so much in Europe. Localization partners are taking these. We knew those costs, but then along the way, the shipping costs are going up, which means that any forecasting based on what money would be coming in, those are completely off. And that is the reality for every single publisher out there, is that when we're talking about the costs involved in printing games, in bringing them to distribution, before they even get to the store where you can buy it and put it on the table, there's an unsustainable path of the shipping costs going up, where early on it was not a big deal. We could easily absorb it, and we could easily say, well, you know what, we will make a few minor adjustments. It's not going to have a detrimental impact on our ability to stay in business and continue producing games. But now, with the path that things are on, and especially if this would have been a short-term thing that would have gone away after a couple months, or even if now we would be starting to go back to normal, we would have been fine. This would have been okay, and we would have said, you know what, that was costly, but that's sometimes these things happen. We take those things into account. That's the cost of doing business sometimes. Now that we know that this is going to be with us for another year and a half, plus we don't know how much prices will dip after that. The assumption is that they will dip, because again, this is a supply and demand, and there's only so much that can be done to keep these insane costs. Most likely, they're not going to go down to what they were. We're not going to see a 40-foot container for $3,000. A good guess is that they will come down to maybe 3 times the original cost, which so somewhere in the neighborhood of $8,000 to $10,000 per 40-foot container. Ideal scenario, not now. Maybe not in 23, maybe 24, but maybe not yet. It will definitely come down slower than it increased, and for sure, there's no reason to believe that there was a hope that the prices would not continue to go up over the summer, that things would plateau a bit. That has not been the case. The prices are continuing to go up. They will continue to go up through the end of the year for sure. Prices are gonna, it's very likely that shipping prices are continuing to increase through the end of the year. Not at the same rate as they have, but they will still continue to inch up through the end of this year. Maybe in 2022 we will start to see a decline and a decrease in shipping costs, but it will be slower than the rate of the increase. All right, so that's the bad news about all this. Now, how does this apply to games in general? Well, first of all, you can expect to see an increase in the cost of games across the board. Games that normally cost $50 or $60 will probably go up to $60 or $70. Games that normally cost $35 will probably go up to $40. This is a reality that we're going to see. Some publishers have already talked about it. Some publishers have said, well, we don't know, we'll wait and see. The reality is that most likely we will see a universal increase in prices. Not because we want to increase the prices, but because that's the only way to sustain business in a time like this. We will certainly eat a portion of the costs of that increase, but we still need to recuperate some of that to be able to maintain a healthy business and still invest in the future of the company, so that we don't just live print run to print run and see what happens. So that's the reality. Now you say, well, if the prices are going up $2 in shipping per copy of the game, or $2.50 or whatever, why is there a $10 increase in the game? Well, that's because that price increases the price for the distributor, which increases the price to the retailer, which means that they need to sell the game at a higher price to be profitable. So in order to make sure that everyone shares a little bit of the burden, but that everyone can still maintain a sustainable business, that means that for a $50 or $60 game, the prices are going to go up about $10. That's reasonable to see across the industry in general. So yes, now related to this is another, if you want to basically look at another thing that Andre wrote, and there will be more articles and stuff like this, but there's also an interesting thing to read about the breakdown of prices for a board game. How does this come into play for, again, looking at Origins, for example? What's the breakdown in what things cost, and art and development cost, marketing cost? What do different things look like? These two articles together, they give a good insight into some of the costs, so that you know when you're making a purchase, what are you paying for? Why are prices the way they are for board games, based on the other costs and so forth. And also explains a little bit about, helps explain why what we're seeing in logistics and so forth, why that impacts prices of games. So now the question is, well, why don't more people produce games then locally? Why not make the games in the United States? Why not make them in Europe? And there are two parts to that answer as well. The first one is, on a practical point of view, it doesn't matter where they're produced. There's still the need for international shipping. There's still the need for producing things, shipping them all over the world. Now you might say, well, shouldn't the shipping costs be slightly lower then? Bringing them from the US to China, bringing them from the US to Europe instead of shipping from China. And while that's true, the reality is, and this is not an exaggeration or anything, the reality is that the majority of the games that are produced today there is no way, there's no capability, no technology that exists in factories in the United States or Germany, for example, that have the capabilities of printing these games. Take a look at some of the components from Tabanusi, for example. So these plastic pieces and so forth. If we went to a US factory and we said, okay, well this is the game that we want to produce. First of all, the cost of the game, it would be much higher than it is printing it in China, despite the increase in shipping cost. But some of these components, they would then source from China. So even if you went to a US or a German or Czech printer or whatever, they would source a lot of their parts and materials from China. So this does not in any way eliminate the problem. So you have, the reality is that the capabilities of printing these games, it does not exist. If you're printing cards, sure. If you're printing games with fairly standard components, cubes, discs, and so forth, sure, that you can do. Not at the same quality, at the same price. So you have to make a sacrifice somewhere. You can print it at the same price by decreasing the quality, or you can decrease. You can maintain the quality by paying a much higher cost, and that is assuming that you don't need any kind of special tooling and so forth. And again, we're not talking just about injection molding and stuff. A lot of those things that exist. But when we're talking about the process of board games, where you have relatively small print runs that need custom components and stuff, and you say, well, why do we have to put all these custom things in here? Well, that's the part of the reality, right? Is that that also depends on the consumer expectations. Are there games that are printed in the United States and in Europe? There absolutely are. But there's also the consumer-driven desire for certain things that the plans were already made to produce them in China because that's where the capabilities to do so existed, including screen-printed wood, especially at that size, the small ones. The technology is 5 to 10 years away elsewhere, and that's sadly the reality for that. Neuron Collider is asking, is there pressure on designers to publish more card-based games or pressure on publishers to sell in smaller packages? First of all, selling in smaller packages is not necessarily a good solution. But let me answer the first part first. Is there pressure on designers to publish more card-based games? Maybe. The downside is that the games that we are publishing now, that are coming out now, they have been in the works for 2 years. So if this would have been something that was looked at and the plans were made a year ago, then that would affect games that are coming out in 2023. And there are certainly a few things there where there are different plans that have been made. But the majority of the games that were designed and that were ready to be published, they were designed 2018, 2019. They were not designed recently and basically ready for publication. So that's one part of it. When it comes to selling in smaller packages, this is very much driven by there's a fine line between how much you're selling a game for based on the components in that game. Like we've done with expansions, for example. With expansions, we limit the size of the box because you don't need, typically most people, they will take the components out of the expansion, they will put it into the main game box and such. So that's the size of the box is less of a consideration. But the size of the box in general needs to compete with other games that are the same size. Now you look at some of our games, look at Tabanusi for example. That game cannot fit in a smaller box. Origins is the same way, it can't fit in a smaller box. Can some other games that we've made fit in smaller boxes? Again, it depends. It depends on the expectation of what consumers want. Would people be willing to, and would they buy the same game at a different cost if it did not contain certain things? Again, if there was a sacrifice made in the quality of the components. What if there's no insert to help organize, whatever it might be. Whenever a game contains a board, now you're automatically going to the Ticket to Ride size box, because you can't have a 10-fold board that folds out, right? I mean, it's not that you can't, you don't want to have something that folds up in lots. You don't want to, so basically your options are for any kind of standard size board, it's a 4 or 6, sometimes an 8-fold board. That requires a certain minimum size of box. And it's also about the footprint in the shelf size in the store and so forth, and the expectation from the consumer that a box of a certain size cannot cost more than a certain amount of money, no matter what the production cost is, because from a publisher point of view and from a retailer point of view, it would be difficult for them to say, well, here we have 2 games. This one costs $60 and it's in a Ticket to Ride size box. This one costs $70 and it's in a box that is the size of Carcassonne, for example. Consumers will look at that and say, and the majority of consumers will say, well, this one seems like it's a better value because it's a bigger box. Now, obviously, if you're an educated consumer, you know that the box size doesn't necessarily mean the value and so forth when it comes to components, or for that matter, how much is in the game. But the reality is that the price of the game is driven by the price of the production. So based on the components and how much goes into it, that's going to drive the retail price. And the size of the box is very little. That doesn't have to do. I mean, like, obviously there's a change in cost, and it's not a small amount, but it's also about what fits in your portfolio. What size of games are you already producing? That's part of the image of the brand and so forth, right? It's like car manufacturers. You can have 2 cars that cost the same. Some of them are smaller in size, some are bigger, because they target different consumers. The size of the box, that's a separate topic that is a little bit more complicated and not directly tied to the cost of things. But when it comes to pressure on designers to adapt to this, even, let's say, is there a pressure on publishers to pursue other types of games? I mean, there is that pressure now. Was there that pressure when some of these games were designed? No, because the pandemic did not exist. The majority of the games that are coming out now were signed, and production and everything started getting planned, and everything was invested into these games before the pandemic hit and before these issues became apparent. So then the next question here is if there's an incentive to assemble the games locally. You still have the cost then of shipping the components, then they have to be assembled locally. That's certainly something that we are looking into. It depends. It's not always the most feasible thing to do. And part of the reason why is that anything that needs to be shipped. So let's say that you ship more dense things, you produce the more dense things, maybe plastics and whatever. In China, you ship those components and you print the things that can be reasonably printed at an affordable cost, like cards or so. Let's say that we print those in Europe and we ship things to Europe to be assembled there. The issue is that now you have the lead times at the factory, which actually, going back to the part about printing locally, there's not always the option of printing locally because of the capacity at the factory. So even factories that have the capacity for something that might match several games, if everyone switched to that, now you would have a backlog that they just can't handle the same volume. But then you have okay, so what if we ship certain things from China? So let me give you this scenario, and this is also related to what we're talking about, right? In April, we reprinted Tekkenu and Teotihuacan and a couple other things. They were ready in April. It took us 85 days to get space on a ship. Not because we didn't try or because we didn't have many times agreements that, oh yes, this week we can get you on a ship. It just didn't happen for 85 days. Now that means that meanwhile, we are paying the storage fees because we still have to pay those. Just because they don't get on a ship does not mean that even though it's not our fault, we have to pay those storage costs. So let's say that you're making some components in one place and then you're making the other ones somewhere else. Well, now you're paying storage fees in two locations. So you printed some things early, then you're waiting for the other things to come, and then you have to assemble those, and then you have to again ship things out. And again, you might have the issue of waiting and so forth. It's the fact that you're now taking something where you're only waiting on ocean freight once to potentially waiting on ocean freight twice, both when it comes to receiving it before assembly and then receiving it, and then shipping out the finished product. It's the logistics part there. It does not exist today in a way that is reliable, efficient, and affordable. It is unfortunately not a good option. We're looking into it because that's a potential solution, but there are lots of risks along the way when it comes to that as well. All right, I don't want to spend much more time talking about the costs and so forth. I just wanted to give a detailed overview of this. How is this affecting the prices of games? What's the situation? When will we see a let up in this? The short answer is the logistics craziness, not just for board games, but globally for other products, is going to be with us. They're going to continue to increase throughout the rest of this year. Will for sure be an issue throughout 2022. Don't be upset at companies that are facing delays because of this. Most of the time it's not because they want to, because they don't want to delay, because they're paying storage fees and most likely an increased shipping cost, but it's the fact that they cannot get room on ships. They cannot ship these containers. These are things that were already in the works well before the pandemic hit. The publishers are just trying to do their best, so please be patient with them. The other thing that I wanted to mention with regards to this, and I lost my thought there, was, not just board games in general. Expect Christmas shopping to look different this year. There will be, and toy manufacturers, they've been saying the same thing, a lot of other manufacturers, because there are issues with raw materials, there are issues with manufacturing, there are delays in logistics and everything. No matter what you're in the market for, chances are that there will be a shortage and an increase in cost for everything. There's a shortage and an increase in cost for automobiles. There's toys and games and everything. Retailers right now are not incentivized to invest in empty promises. And it's not an empty promise because of any ill will, but if you go and you want to pre-order a game, you want to pre-order Gen Con releases, you want to pre-order things that come out at Spiel or whatever, it's if you pre-order it, sure, but if you're saying, I'm just going to hope to and get that when it comes in, chances are that retailers are not going to take the risk of stocking items that may or may not come out on time. They will invest in things that are ready to ship, that are already in the warehouses, everything that is already at the distributor. That's what they will prioritize because they have a business to run. They cannot afford to have empty shelves that could have held the newest and hottest releases at the expense of having stocked shelves with products that exist today that are still good selling items and so forth. So that means that any games that you were looking to get that are coming out now or near the end of this year, chances are that they may not be there. Take our games, for example, Origins First Builders, Tabanusi, Zapotec. We are hoping that they will get released basically in November 1st. Now, I'll make a caveat here. This should not apply to pre-orders of... It does not apply to pre-orders of Zapotec and Tabanusi in the United States. Those are different because those are going through Board Game Geek, but I will let them talk about... I'm not going to make any promises. I'm not going to make any statements on their behalf because the Zapotec will be available exclusively through Board Game Geek in North America until March. Tabanusi pre-orders will not go directly through us. It will go through Board Game Geek and so forth. So I will let them make the statement as I'm not going to make any promises on their behalf. But what I can say is that retail copies of Tabanusi, retail copies of Origins, we are hoping, assuming that everything gets on the boat on time, that they will be available in the United States the first week or so of November. If they don't get on the boat, then every week that gets delayed, the release date is going to get delayed. This is going to happen across the board. A lot of publishers will not get their games on time for when they think that they should be released. That means that release dates before the pandemic, we used to have global release dates where we said this game releases on July 30th globally. And July 30th, it was available in retail stores everywhere. It was available as Gen Con premiere, and that is not happening anymore. Those days, we're hoping to get back to them, but right now, a game might release earlier in one region, later somewhere else. Release dates that used to be rock solid, they are now up in the air. Until something is on the boat, we cannot promise any kind of release date. No publisher can. The reality is that unless you're air shipping things, everything else is up in the air. So whenever a publisher says, hey, it will be this time, you feel like, oh, this is close to the release. It should release in just a month or two. They're up in the air. And again, this will affect holiday shopping and so forth. So just be patient with, especially the retailers. Don't give them a hard time if they are not stocking things. They may not be able to. They may not want to take that risk. Buy good games that are already out. Support your local stores and buy games that are already available. Hopefully next year things will start to look a little bit better. Okay, enough about these things. I want to spend the rest of this time talking about positive things. I want to look towards the future. The positive things is that there is no end to innovation and so forth. Now, I just said don't count on new games being out. I know some publishers that are holding off on new releases. I know that we talked about the fact that maybe publishers should rethink the things and stuff. The good thing is also that this is a time when we've seen, in general, fewer games getting published. We've seen more reliable releases coming out and so forth, and we've seen a lot of reprints of things. The good thing is that in general, more time, the quality of games has gone up. The quality of components, both the quality of cards and card stock and rule books and plastics, whatever it might be, that has increased, partly because of innovations in technology and so forth. But the quality of gameplay, the things that can be done with games, that has increased. A lot of publishers in general have moved away from a model where they would print 30 new games a year and just flood the market with them, to printing fewer games. Now, I'm not counting expansions in that, but and as an example, Board&Dice. We typically have one release in the first half of the year. Normally that's been around the time frame of Origins, so this year that was Mandala Stones. Then typically we have another game that releases in the July-August time frame, which is when Gen Con is normally at. This year that was supposed to be Origins First Builders. Of course, with the pandemic and logistics and everything, that game has not come out yet. And then we normally release a game in October in time for Spiel. That game will not be available in time for Spiel. It will hopefully be available immediately after. That game is Tabanusi. Now you might say, well, what about Zapotec? That doesn't fit in there. That's a fourth game. Well, and that's also part of the reason why we didn't want the game to compete and so forth with other games. That's a game that is coming out at separately through Board Game Geek as an exclusive game to them. Will come out in retail in North America in March. So a bit of a staggered. Basically, it's like a prolonged pre-order or an exclusive first access to a game through the Board Game Geeks shop, and then it will be available later. And again, this focus on fewer games, and again, I'm not talking about expansions here, because expansions they're a separate thing as far as the desire for consumers and so forth to buy them. But focusing on fewer games with much higher quality gameplay. And I've said this many times because I know that we had a different mindset in the past as well. We always strive to improve. I said this last year, and I'm for sure saying it this year. This year, if you include Zapotec as one of those four, and again, I'm not also including the Book of Rituals, which is slightly separate. But let's look at the other four: Mandala Stones, Origins First Builders, Tabanusi, and Zapotec. In any previous year, I would have been delighted and over the moon to have any one of these games come out. The fact that we now have four very, very strong releases that by themselves would have been amazing several years ago. The decrease in the quantity of new titles has led to an increase in the quality of gameplay, and this is across the board. There are so many good games that are coming out because more time is dedicated to the development, to art, or whatever. I mean, look at some of the releases that stand out to you. If you've played any new releases, I'm sure there's a game there that you feel like, oh man, this was such a good game this year, or maybe last year. And we will get such a big variety of answers today because there are more good games that are coming out. Not more games in general, fewer games, but more good ones. So the quality has increased, and that's a really good thing. That's also good for when we're looking at logistics, because that means that, like I was talking about earlier, that has allowed many publishers, us included, to have a more sustainable thing. We can do larger print runs of the same title, less prone to fluctuations in prices, and thereby being able to absorb a portion of the shipping cost. Not forever, which is why there will be price increases, but it still allowed us to stay in business, keep producing and working on good games. So that's one of the things. And I think overall the quality of, again, everything from production to gameplay and all those things, it's gone up. Everything is getting better. There's no end to the innovation in things and the ability to take something that seems like, well, we've done that before. We've done card drafting, we've done dice drafting, we've done rondels and worker placement. Yeah, but they're done differently today. There's fresh innovation happening in the industry. And part of that is also because we are starting to, the industry is getting less and less protected or controlled by a small group of people and more opened up. Obviously Kickstarter did a lot for that because people could put a game on Kickstarter and self-publish it. That has helped in many regards. But you've also had in general, the industry is opening more up. We talked yesterday about diversity and inclusion and so forth. We need more of that. We need more people that come in with a fresh look at game design, fresh look at the themes and topics and everything, and to enrich the gaming experience, because games don't have to stay the same. There's not an end to innovation. We don't have to have trading in the Mediterranean for a Euro game. We can have new themes. You look at games like Lost Ruins of Arnak, for example. You look at games like Origins First Builders. Yes, they have certain traditional mechanisms in them, but they are also featuring a very rich new look at things, new ways of doing things. You look at Tabanusi, for example. You say, well, what am I doing in this game? I'm collecting resources, I'm building buildings, I'm getting some technologies, and what am I going to do differently? Maybe I'll build first and do a technology or whatever. But the point is that the way you do these things and the way that the games make you think is different and fresh and innovative. You still have games that you look at a couple of years ago when Wingspan came out. Whether or not that's a game that you like, you had a game that could come and flood the market by being new and fresh. Maybe not fresh in mechanisms, but it was about birds and it had mass appeal. So many great things are happening. So while we are looking at a little bit of a gloomy outlook when it comes to the perspective when we're talking about the cost of things. The good thing is, by the way, prices have not gone up a lot in the past. For the past 5 to 10 years, especially the last 5 years, prices have been mostly stagnant and have not kept pace with inflation. So that's a good thing. But even though we are seeing some of these negative things with logistics and it has an immediate impact and so forth, we're seeing other positive things that come out of this. Better quality in board games, more rich and unique experiences. You look at things like Chronicles of Crime and such, with innovative use of apps in games in a way that makes sense. We have more things with using plastics in Euro games, or using other things like there are hybrid games and so forth. Lots of good things and exciting things, and not that I can necessarily know what's coming out, but I know for a fact, based on just the things that we are seeing, the things that we are planning, that is continuing. That innovation will still happen. That is still, there's not a stagnation when it comes to the quality of games that will be coming out. In fact, it's rapidly increasing what we are seeing, and that's exciting as from a hobby perspective. Now, let's go then to some other things. What about the hobby itself? What about the social aspects? What's happening? We talked again yesterday about diversity and inclusion, and there is still a lot of work that needs to be done. The game industry has opened up. Again, like I said, there are more publishers, more small publishers as well. It's less about your size and your control over the market and more about the quality of the games that you put out. Every year we see some small publisher that comes out with this amazing game that puts them on the market, or maybe they just publish one game and so forth. It's good that we see these things. There's less of a control by big publishers to control the market or so. This is all a good thing from us as gamers. As a result of this, that also means that we've had more voices in the industry. People are being afforded the ability to speak out on topics that matter. We are speaking more openly about things that were not discussed so openly before. Of course, this is also happening in other industries, but we're talking about the treatment of women, the respect for people of other cultures and races and creeds. These are discussions that we're having. A lot more publishers and public figures are taking a stance. This is a wider support for these things. A lot of conventions and a lot of industry organizations are taking a stance. These things are all tremendously good. The downside is this would have been nice if it happened 5-10 years ago. We are still very much behind when it comes to respect for everyone. We're still behind when it comes to being a truly diverse group. And I'm not talking just about the people that like games, but I'm talking about the approach to gaming. The industry still likes to... if you're asking a non-gamer what the average gamer looks like, the image that we are still perpetuating is not one of diversity and inclusion. It's not one of diverse people of different ages and so forth. Some people will say, well, gaming, that's just board games, is just something for kids. Other people will say, well, board games, that's something that we do when we go to grandma's house. It will be something that is associated with a certain group of people, white men, or it will be by whatever it is, rich or poor or so, depending on a little bit on your culture and so forth. We have a lot of work to do to fight against that image, and the way we do it is by changing our approach to things. If you did not watch yesterday the video by Mick and Starla, Our Family Plays Games, about diversity and inclusion, I highly recommend that you watch it. I also recommend that you watch the part afterwards. I'm not trying to say that you should listen to me as a white guy talking about race and diversity and so forth, but I still want you to hear some of those thoughts that I shared yesterday, of from our perspective as a publisher who none of us are of a minority within our company. There are minimum efforts that everyone should be making that are not being made today. And we as a publisher call on other publishers to take those steps, to make those changes and work for a better industry. We want more people in this industry. We need more people, particularly in these times. COVID has taught us many things, and if one of them is that we need that social interaction. We need more people in the industry. We don't want to close things off. We want things to be inviting. We want people to be part of this hobby, and we want everyone to feel like they have a voice and that they matter, that their ideas matter. That's one of the reasons why we have so many good games coming out, is because more voices are being heard, more voices matter. We want more of that. We want the industry to continue to grow. I also encourage you to listen carefully when people are talking about these issues. There are some that have been talking about these for years and they don't feel like they're being heard. There are some that are tirelessly talking about these issues, whether or not they're being heard. Please listen to them and work on doing your part in changing. This is a fragile hobby that is dependent on its people. We need more people. We need an inviting environment. We need that diversity. We also need to get along. We need to celebrate the things that bring us together. We need to celebrate the games that allow us to enjoy things. We have so many things to choose from, so many games, and regardless of what you like heavy, thinky games, you like fun party games, you like highly thematic and luck-based games. I don't care what it is that you like. There's a game for you out there. There are many games for you. And the fact that you can enjoy those games with other people that have the same likes as you, that's wonderful. That's something to celebrate. But in order to do so, we need to foster a positive environment. When you see things being said, don't be afraid to use your voice, because your voice matters. Stand up against the bullies. Stand with those that are being bullied. We can't tolerate insensitive remarks. We cannot tolerate racist, sexist, any kind of views that degrade other people and that show a disrespect for the values of other people. We cannot tolerate that. We must use our voice, particularly if we can't leave it to the people who are oppressed or the people who are in minorities. We must lend our voice to them. We choose to do so as a publisher. We speak up on these issues and matters because it's important. It has nothing to do with financial gain for us. It has nothing to do with us trying to get attention to things that we do or so. We know that we still have a long way to go, that we as a publisher, we need to grow. But we're doing this because this is the type of hobby that we want to be in. We want to have a diverse and inclusive hobby. The only way that we get there is by us openly supporting it, by making sure that the people that we surround ourselves with are the ones that we want to game with. We do not want an industry where people use their position or power, whether implicit or not, whether it is because of their position within a company, their financial strength, or just because they happen to have a following that listens to them. We do not want them to be able to have a loud voice and shout over those who are just fighting for the same rights that all of us enjoy. We want this hobby to be inviting. We want more people to be in this hobby, and we want this to be welcoming, because the next generation of gamers will be dependent on it. The next couple of years of the games that we will be enjoying will be dependent on people feeling welcomed to come with their innovation and their ideas and enrich our hobby and continue forward and enjoying many, many years of more games, better games, and just this hobby needs to grow. It is growing, but it needs to continue on that path, and we want to set an example for others, and we can do so, and we will, as a publisher, will continue to use our voice to stand up for those things. All right. Yes. That will, for now, conclude this portion. If you have any questions, anything that you want to talk about or so, in general, despite how gloomy it may seem with the logistics and stuff, and especially because this is a global thing that does not just affect board gaming, in general, I hope that we can all look forward positively, and there are lots of good things to celebrate.